He is considered one of the most dangerous criminals in the history of Jamaica. He was a feared gang leader from the late 1980s to the early 1990s, responsible for a list of heinous crimes including robberies, torture, and murders. He was the one and only Natty Morgan. In this video, I look at crimes he had committed, his skillful escape from police custody, and his own brutal death. Plus, I take you on a visit to his grave. I am Nigel D. Salmon. Welcome to Jamaican Chapter. It was Friday, March 23, 1990. Natty Morgan and his cronies stole a taxi cab. In the stolen car, he and his cronies started off on a journey from St. Andrew to Spanish Town. They shared one intention that night: to commit robbery. And it was not the first time that they were committing such a crime. Natty Morgan and his gang members had carried out many robberies before, and with their experiences, they were ready for this one. Natty Morgan led his cronies to a large house in Spanish Town, St. Catherine. By the looks of the house and the community, it was very clear that the owner had lots of money and valuables. When Natty Morgan and his cronies tried to trick the homeowner to get in, the homeowner figured out their intention. He pulled his licensed firearm and a shootout began. Though the licensed firearm owner acted alone, he was able to stand against Natty Morgan and his cronies. The licensed firearm owner managed to shoot Natty Morgan in both legs and rendered him unable to walk. Natty Morgan's friends managed to get him back into the stolen taxi cab and sped off. The homeowner was not hurt. The friends eventually took Natty Morgan to Lime Hall in the parish of St. Anne, where Natty Morgan had relatives. But someone in the Lime Hall community informed on him, and Natty Morgan was arrested by the St. Anne's Bay police. The St. Anne's Bay police took Natty Morgan to the St. Anne's Bay Hospital because, of course, he was shot in both legs. A day after, police from Kingston took Natty Morgan to the Kingston Public Hospital KPH. An attempt by Natty Morgan's cronies to get him from this hospital failed, and the cronies had to flee from the building. Natty Morgan was later moved to the General Penitentiary to make sure he would be in a more secure place. In police custody, Natty Morgan was charged with robbery with aggravation, rape, shooting with intent, and was charged for 9 murders. Let's look at the most serious charge: the 9 murders. Who were those 9 victims of Natty Morgan? Let's look at them individually. On Monday, January 8, 1990, it is alleged that Natty Morgan and his cronies held up 25-year-old Raymond Burke at gunpoint in Kingston and robbed him. Exactly 32 days after, Natty Morgan and his cronies, for whatever reason, decided to target this young man again. So on Thursday, February 8, 1990, Natty Morgan and his 6 cronies traveled in a van to Ferry Road in St. Andrew, where the 25-year-old laborer Raymond Burke lived. After jumping from the van, Natty Morgan and his cronies kicked open the front door of Raymond's house, dragged him and another man outside. Thankfully, the other man managed to escape. Natty Morgan and his cronies then shot Raymond Burke several times in the head, killing him on the spot. On Sunday, January 28, 1990, it is alleged that Natty Morgan and his father, Desmond Morgan, murdered 27-year-old businessman Donald Nunes. Natty Morgan and his father called Donald Nunes out of a show house in Riverton City and then shot him dead. Desmond Morgan, Natty Morgan's father, was also arrested and jointly charged for this murder. Both father and son were jointly charged for the murder of Donald Nunes. When Natty Morgan later escaped from custody, Desmond Morgan alone faced the court for the murder. But after the prosecution witnesses repeatedly failed to appear in court out of fear, the 54-year-old Rastafarian Desmond Morgan walked free from the home circuit court. Natty Morgan was charged for the killing of 7 men in Seaview Gardens, Kingston 11. The killings happened on February 25, 1990. Of course, Natty Morgan was not the only one considered responsible for this mass shooting. But before looking into who were arrested and charged, let's look at the killing of the 7 men and how it happened. On Thursday, February 22, 1990, 19-year-old Howard Dennis of Lot 1632 Java Path, Seaview Gardens, was shot dead by 19-year-old Peter Lawrence. And this happened in broad daylight. So what was the motive? Howard Dennis and Peter Lawrence hated each other ever since an incident at a football match some years before. Both of them lived in Seaview Garden. In fact, Peter Lawrence was a member of the Natty Morgan's gang and lived at 765 Yellow Sea Drive, Seaview Gardens, Phase 2. Family members of the dead Howard Dennis were warned that 9 Night was not to be held for him. Though this unreasonable threat was serious, family and friends of Howard Dennis decided to gather at his residence in memory of him. It was the night of Saturday, February 24, 1990, and the 9-night was in session at Howard Dennis' residence. Persons were singing hymns, and the crowd was engaged in various activities, including eating, drinking, telling jokes, and playing dominoes. No one seemed to have remembered the threat from the Natty Morgan's gang, and the gathering at the house continued into the early morning of Sunday, February 25. Between 1:30 and 2 a.m. on that Sunday morning, 7 gunmen from this Natty Morgan gang were sighted approaching the house. A man who was standing at the gate shouted out that there were gunmen coming, and individuals began running in different directions, while others ran into the house and closed the door. The gunmen kicked open the doors to the house, ordered 7 men to lie on the floor, and shot them all in their heads using M16 assault rifles and a 9mm pistol. All were killed execution style. The 7 murder victims are 29 years old Paul Johnson of 12 Merrick Avenue, Kingston 10, 42 years old technician Lee Ford Monteith of Lot 1619 Seaview Gardens Phase 2, 23 years old Christopher Gore of Lot 1625 Seaview Gardens Phase 2, 32 years old contractor Kenzel Hughes of Seaview Gardens Phase 2, 19 years old Dury Matthews of Seaview Gardens, 50 years old Stokely Merrick, a cabinet maker of Lot 1545 Seaview Gardens, and 40 years old Errol Gibbs, a photographer of Pembroke Hall Drive, Kingston 20. Police investigations into the brutal murders of the 7 were intense. Eyewitnesses were able to identify some of the attackers. The following persons were sought by the police for the killings: Floyd Howell, otherwise called Tika; Irvin Cox, also called Shorty, a 14-year-old youth said to be a relative of Natty Morgan; Peter Lawrence; Garth Williams; Anthony Alfonso Palmer, also called Eddie Bap; and Nathaniel Morgan, aka Natty Morgan. There are claims among some who knew Natty Morgan that he was not personally involved in the killing of the 7 men. But Natty Morgan was charged after he was positively pointed out by a witness in a police identification parade. Being charged for 9 murders, Natty Morgan knew he was going to be destroyed by the government system. In plain words, he would be found guilty and sentenced to death. In such dilemma, Natty Morgan understood that he had to contrive the seemingly impossible thing for the sake of survival. He must find a way to escape. But before looking at Natty Morgan's daring escape, let's briefly look at the other 6 men whom the police wanted for the killing of the 7 in Seaview Gardens. Anthony Alfonso Palmer, called Eddie Bop, was charged for the Seaview Gardens massacre. He was later shot dead by police, so he never made it to court trial. The 14-year-old youth was charged for the Seaview Garden massacre and held in juvenile custody. He later escaped from the Stony Hill place of safety in early 1993, so he never got to go to the court trial. Garth Williams was sought by the police in connection to the Seaview Garden massacre, but the police interest in him dropped. Garth later went on to have a career in music. Peter Lawrence was charged for the murder of 19-year-old Howard Dennis and was also charged for the murders of the 7 men who were attending the 9-night held for Howard Dennis. Peter Lawrence escaped from custody with Natty Morgan in December 1990. I will later go into details regarding what eventually happened to him. Floyd Howell, otherwise called Tika, was also charged for the murders of the 7 men in Seaview Gardens. On Thursday, October 28, 1993, the then 25-year-old Floyd Howell was found guilty and sentenced to death by hanging. Irvin Cox was also charged for the murder of the 7 in Seaview Gardens, Kingston 11 on February 25, 1990. Irvin Cox was tried with Floyd Howell when both were found guilty and given the death sentence. Luckily for them, Jamaica did not carry out any more death sentence since 1988. So their death sentences were commuted to life imprisonment. It was Wednesday, December 19, 1990. 24-year-old Nathaniel Morgan, aka Natty Morgan, and 19-year-old Peter Lawrence were taken from the General Penitentiary to the gun court in a prison truck with over 24 other prisoners. The truck arrived at the gun court around 10:20 a.m. and the prisoners were led from the truck to a holding area that could be locked, and then have a police officer assigned to monitor the prisoners. On that Monday, the police were short-staffed, meaning a shortage of police officers. So prison warders were given the responsibility to monitor the prisoners. The gun court adjourned shortly after 1 p.m. and Natty Morgan and Peter were taken back to the holding area into the custody of prison warders. About 4 p.m., the truck returned to the gun court for the prisoners. While the prisoners were being counted, it was discovered by the police officers that 2 were missing: Natty Morgan and Peter Lawrence had escaped. So how was Natty Morgan able to carry out this daring and extraordinary escape? This was the big question behind the investigation that followed. It was an intense investigation, and it led to the arrest and charge of 2 prison warders from the General Penitentiary in Kingston. Carl Henry, age 22, and Handel Dixon, age 26, both of them prison warders, were arrested and charged on Wednesday, May 8th of 1991. They were charged for being accessory after the fact. In simple terms, they were charged for assisting the prisoners in their escape from justice. 3 other prison warders were also charged, but on a different charge. The 3 prison warders were Valentine Smith, age 39, Jephthah Dixon, age 34, and 39 years old Jeffrey James. All 3 were charged for assault occasioning actual bodily harm. You see, on that day, when the 2 warders assisted Natty Morgan and Peter Lawrence to escape, these 3 warders had beaten the remaining prisoners to keep them silent about the circumstances of the escape. So that's why they were charged for assault occasioning actual bodily harm. Another man was also charged for helping the prisoners to escape. He was Milton O'Mealy, a taxi operator from Seaview Gardens. So it was a total of 6 individuals charged in relation to the escape of Natty Morgan and Peter Lawrence. 2 warders charged for assisting the escape, 3 warders charged for beating some of the prisoners to not say anything about the escape, and a taxi driver charged for his role in waiting for the prisoners to come outside and driving them away. Natty Morgan and Peter Lawrence were both wearing the uniform of prison warders. Yes, warders' uniform, when they got into the taxi cab that awaited them. The uniforms were provided to Natty Morgan and Peter Lawrence by the prison warders. This sounds like something out of a movie. The escape of Natty Morgan made big headlines on the island in newspaper, radio, and television news. He was then Jamaica's most wanted criminal. Police officers feared him. In fact, he was so feared that the Jamaica Constabulary Force and the Jamaica Defense Force had to come together to form a task force to search for him. Unlike some prison escapees who got isolated and left on their own, Natty Morgan had support. Support from his various baby mothers, family members, individuals from places he used to live, and support from his gang members. After escaping from prison, Natty Morgan wasted little time before rearming himself and regrouping his gang. Let's not forget Peter Lawrence. What happened to him after the escape? From December 19, 1990 to February 7, 1991, Peter Lawrence was also keeping out of the reach of the police. During this period, he was linked to at least 7 murders. But on Friday, February 8, 1991, Peter Lawrence came to the end of his rope. The police got a tip that the wanted men were in the swamplands of Riverton City. The police then organized a hunt called Operation Snap King. This operation was comprised of over 50 officers, and the operation was headed by Superintendent Garnet Daly. At 7 a.m. on that Friday morning, that's February 7, 1991, Operation Snap King went into the bushes of Riverton City. As they entered, they came under heavy fire by the gunmen who were using M16 assault rifles. A shootout began with one gunman lay dead. The battle between the officers and the gunmen got heated. The police officers were heavily armed, but the gunmen matched them fire for fire with their M16 rifles. As the gun battle raged on, the officers failed to get the upper hand. No side was getting the upper hand over the other, while the deafening sounds of high-powered weapons sounded across Riverton City. Was Operation Snap King about to fail? Superintendent Garnet Daly began to get desperate along with the other officers. Operation Snap King needed reinforcement. The gunmen were heavily armed and they were not backing down. So 2 helicopters from the military were called in to help. The officers concluded that since they could not defeat the gunmen solely on land, they will defeat them with aerial support from the helicopters. The intention was to have the military helicopters pinpoint the location of the gunmen, also confusing them, giving way for the ground force to try crush them. And this strategy worked. At the end of the shootout, 4 gunmen lay dead and the others fled. Peter Lawrence was discovered to be among the dead. The names of all the 4 dead men are Devon Swaby, age 18, Owen Malcolm, age 26, Brenton Jenkinson, and Peter Lawrence. The death of Peter Lawrence was viewed as a big achievement by the police. The body of Peter Lawrence was carried from the bushes like an animal. Operation Snap King had eliminated Peter Lawrence. The mission was to also eliminate Natty Morgan, but Natty Morgan was nowhere in sight. On Wednesday, April 3, 1991, Dr. Garfield George Sadler, lecturer in the Department of Chemistry at UWI Mona, was in the company of his friend Rosemary Stewart, a friend who worked in New York, USA. The two were at Red Hills Mall, 105 Red Hills Road in Kingston, when they were pounced on by two gunmen. The gunmen took control of Dr. Sadler's gray Hyundai car, then drove off with both Dr. Sadler and Miss Stewart. They were never seen by their loved ones again. Natty Morgan's gang was responsible for the abduction. The two gunmen brought Dr. Sadler and Miss Stewart to Riverton City. They were brought to Natty Morgan, to be exact. Natty Morgan and his cronies had a conversation with Dr. Sadler and Miss Stewart. Natty Morgan himself was gentle with them. Later that night, according to the findings of police investigations, Natty Morgan and 4 of his cronies left Riverton City in Dr. Sadler's car and went to Clarendon and St. Anne, where they committed several robberies. The grey Hyundai car was later abandoned in Forepath, Clarendon. While they were out committing those robberies, Dr. Sadler and Miss Stewart were left in the care of a man called Clinton Findletter, a member of Natty Morgan's gang. But if they, members of the Natty Morgan gang, wanted only the car, why did they abduct Dr. Sadler and Miss Stewart? Well, this question is not hard to answer. You see, criminals like these do not usually act with conscience. Whatever was the reason for the abduction, both victims were killed and their bodies never found. The hunt for Natty Morgan, Jamaica's most wanted criminal, was intensified in April of 1991, not long after the abduction of Dr. Sadler and Miss Stewart. A task force of 380 men from the military and police force was organized, and this task force was headed by Deputy Commissioner Roddy Hamilton and Lieutenant Colonel John Simmons of the Jamaica Defense Force. At 6 p.m. on Monday, April 6, 1991, the 380 policemen and soldiers fanned out into the parishes of St. Andrew, Kingston, St. Thomas, St. Catherine, St. Mary, and even St. Anne to begin the search for Natty Morgan. It was a land, air, and sea search. Natty Morgan was, at this point, considered so dangerous that such search for him requests a combined force of police and soldiers. But no amount of effort in early 1991 was successful in locating Natty Morgan. Operating as just one man with few of his devoted friends, Natty Morgan was elusive. Natty Morgan's strength was not from his guns alone. The larger part of his strength came from individuals who supported him. Those individuals were his extra eyes and ears for what was happening from the side of the police force. They helped him with medication, cooked his food, washed his clothes, and, regarding young women, gave him sex. Natty Morgan, in return, was known to provide a sense of protection by getting rid of unwanted gangsters from the areas. He was known to also, from time to time, give away money in Riverton City. At the time of his escape from the gun court on December 19, 1990, he was the father of over 10 children. And while on the run, he would make even more, some of whom might be watching this video right now. All efforts by the police in the first half of 1991 to catch Natty Morgan failed. The police were successful in other areas, such as the shooting of Peter Lawrence and the arrest of several individuals for harboring a fugitive. Though the police did not catch Natty Morgan in the first half of 1991, they did come in contact with him. One of such contacts or confrontations happened on the night of Friday, May 10, 1991. On that Friday night, Natty Morgan and his cronies were engaged in a shootout with police officers in Riverton City. At the end of the shootout, Natty Morgan and his cronies had left without a scratch. But there was a fatality. A 19-year-old young woman lay dead. Her name said to be Carol Brown, killed by a police officer's stray bullet. Here, her body lay on a slab inside Madden's funeral home. She was suspected to be a girlfriend of Natty Morgan. Some protests happened the next day after this young woman's death, but everything soon returned to normal. Going into the second half of the year 1991, Natty Morgan began feeling the heat from the efforts led by the police. Though it was never openly said, it was clear at this point that the police had dropped the effort to recapture Natty Morgan to the effort to kill him. The police wanted him dead. They had killed several members of the Natty Morgan gang, arrested some of his supporters, that's the persons who were harboring him, and therefore they knew the gang was somewhat weakened. But further weakening of the Natty Morgan gang came from Natty Morgan himself. He had put to death few members of his own gang brutally, but had only done so after they had done something he found unforgivable. For example, when he left Dr. Sadler and Miss Stewart in the care of few gang members, he did not give order for the doctor and the lady to be killed. But in the absence of Natty Morgan, that was exactly what happened. Miss Stewart was raped, and she and Dr. Sadler were then killed and their bodies disposed of. This irated Natty Morgan, who responded by killing the gang members responsible. Named members of his own gang he is known to have killed include Evan Jones and one known only as Wasp. It was the early morning of Sunday, August 18, 1991. The 5 feet 8 inches tall Natty Morgan, then age 25, was traveling in a van with 3 other men, 3 of his cronies. One of the 3 men was Natty Morgan's right-hand man, 24 years old Arthur Hamilton, also known as Bomber. What they did not know was that the police were tipped off about their whereabouts and were in the area. The van was traveling along Lake Spen Road in the parish of St. Catherine, in the vicinity of Lake Spen Dump. A police patrol intercepted the van with intention to find out the identities of the occupants. Natty Morgan and his cronies could not allow this. They knew they would be immediately arrested and brought back to prison, or they would be shot dead. According to the police version, Natty Morgan and his cronies began shooting first. The police officers retaliated and a shootout started. Bullets shattered the windows of the van, flesh tore up by shots, blood ran, a policeman wounded. 2 of Natty Morgan's cronies escaped, with the wounded Natty Morgan, unable to run, decided to shoot to the end. He decided to shoot to his own death. And that's exactly what happened. When the exchange of bullets stopped, Natty Morgan and his right-hand man, Bomber, lay dead. An M16 AR-15 rifle was taken from the body of Natty Morgan, while a Remington repeater shotgun was taken from the body of Bomber. As if this was not the end, and maybe out of anger, 1 or more of the police officers stood over the body of Natty Morgan and fired multiple bullets into his body and face, up his face beyond recognition. Because of this, fingerprints identification had to be done to officially confirm Natty Morgan's identity. He could not be identified by face because his face was all torn up by bullets. Such fingerprints identification was done by comparing the print from a finger that Natty Morgan had lost in a previous shootout with the prints from the fingers on his dead body. Natty Morgan is dead. I am at Dovecot Memorial Park here in St. Catherine. And this is where the infamous Natty Morgan was laid to rest. Many of you must have thought it was at Mapen Cemetery or at Calvary Cemetery. But no, after Natty Morgan was killed by the police, his body was brought to Madden's funeral home in downtown Kingston. And after the autopsy, the body was released to the family for burial. And they choose here, Dovecote. But before showing you the resting place of Natty Morgan, I'm going to show you the grave of somebody else that I've mentioned in the story. His father, Desmond Morgan. His father lived for quite a long time after his death, something like 14 years before he died. I'm not sure what his father died from, but this is his grave here at Dovecote. This is the grave of Natty Morgan's father, Desmond Morgan. And of course, he had his share of run-ins with the law, you know. And there were other incidents which I did not mention in the story because it did not tie in with what I was telling about his son. And on his grave here at Dovecote, it says, Desmond Morgan, we think of you, dear father, and the happy days gone by. March 10, 1932 to April 30, 2006. So this is his grave here. At Dovecote, the grave of Desmond Morgan. Remember I told you that he and his son were charged for a murder, and that his son, Natty Morgan, escaped before he could be tried, and that Desmond witness got scared. the prosecution, they tried desperately to get the witnesses, but the witnesses disappeared. And they would not want to turn up to testify against Natty Morgan's father. They were scared for their lives. So they didn't turn up, and because of that, Desmond here, he was freed of the murder charge. So this is his grave here at Dovecote Memorial Park. Now, let's go and visit the subject of this story, his grave, Natty Morgan. I am standing in a different section, another section of the Dovecote Memorial Park here, a huge cemetery, I must tell you, all the way looking up there, all the way down there, that's the cemetery. And I'm standing in the section where Natty Morgan was buried. I did not gather much about his funeral, but in One Gleaner article, it said that his funeral was like a party, a celebration. And you have seen it in recent times where, famous criminals, their funeral are like a party. So now let's walk to where Natty Morgan was buried. So silent, so peaceful now. I guess there are a lot of peace in death, isn't it? So in the section where he's buried, the workers are doing some work here where they're brushing out the grass. It's a huge place. They are doing an excellent job. But in the section where Natty Morgan is buried, the grass is not yet brushed out at the time that I'm standing here. So his funeral was held. I don't know who was crying, who was just, celebrating his life. I don't know what the case was. Didn't find anything on that. And this is the resting place of Natty Morgan, the infamous Natty Morgan. And on his grave it says, Nathaniel Morgan, we loved him a lot, but God loved him more. I want to read that again. Nathaniel Morgan, we loved him a lot. That's understandable. And then it says, but God loved him more. That's debatable. I believe God loved everybody. But not many people would say God was really loving Natty Morgan more. I mean, this is someone who was responsible for a lot of murders. This is someone who was responsible for a lot of robberies, and shootings and just other crimes, And for some of you viewers would always say, why showing his grave, or why showing the grave of men like this? But the thing is that everybody's story needs to be told. There is a broad public interest in people like these. So I'm here telling his story. All right, so let me read it through now. It says, Nathaniel Morgan, we loved him a lot, but God loved him more. January 1, 1966 to August 18, 1991. So he was born January 1, 1966, and he died on August 18, 1991. And of course, we all know how he died. I guess he died the way he lived. Now, this is the number on his grave. It's 1305 LL. LL means lower level. So he is buried below or beneath someone else. And who is that person? Let's take a look. That person is Arthur Hamilton. Arthur Hamilton, otherwise called Bomber. He was Natty Morgan's right-hand man. Yes, He was part of Natty Morgan's gang. And he was as dangerous as Natty Morgan. His name may not be as big as him, but he was also as dangerous. Let's read what it says on his grave. Arthur Hamilton, we loved him a lot, but God loved him more. December 17, 1967 to August 18, 1991. You will notice that he died on the same date with Natty Morgan. Over here on Natty Morgan's graves, he died August 18, 1991. And I have already said it though, that the both of them were killed at the same time in their shootout with the police. From my analysis, it wasn't really a shootout. Natty Morgan and Arthur Hamilton, let me call them by their names, pet names, Natty Morgan and Bomber, they were driving in a car when they were ambushed by the police. And then a shootout began. One police officer was injured and had to be treated at hospital and then sent home in that shooting. But the police officers, they ensured that in this shootout that they killed Natty Morgan. So Natty Morgan is here with his right-hand man. They have the same number, 1305, but he is upper level, meaning that he is buried on top. So Natty Morgan is buried below and Bomber is on top. The both of them were friends in life, gangsters in life, criminals in life, defenders of each other in life. They died together in life and they are buried together in death. So the two gangsters, the two criminals, they are together. I wonder what Natty Morgan is saying, that he is underneath Bomber. The two brethren are down there right now, you know, chatting and, you know, talking and... But on a serious note, these two men lived a life of crime. They died by it together and they are buried together. So this is the grave of Nathaniel Morgan, aka Natty Morgan. I heard so much of him as a child growing up, and I'm glad to be doing his story now as a YouTuber. The grave of Natty Morgan and his right-hand man, Arthur Hamilton, aka Bomber. Both of them buried here at Dovecot Memorial Park here in St. Catherine. Thanks for watching, and I see you again in another interesting video like this.